All right, everybody, welcome back to Culz Interviews. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty well-known TV show. I think at least everyone's seen a episode. I know when I was coming back from Orlando recently, I looked out on the wing of the plane and thought about the Twilight Zone. And our guest Arlen here is quite knowledgeable about all things Twilight Zone, amongst a whole host of other topics. We'll definitely have him back on at some point because you can see behind him he has a lot of comic book stuff he can talk about. But Arlen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great now that I'm on your show.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining. I really do appreciate it. You know, for anyone that perhaps hasn't read your books or listened to any of your lectures, do you want to tell people a little bit about your background and what you do?
Well, I sort of have a twin career as both a comic book style illustrator. I've never done work for the comic book companies. I've always wanted to bring comic book art into the advertising and editorial magazine world where comics were never done well. In the same way Roy Lichtenstein brought comics into the fine art world, my whole career has been trying to get comics into the commercial art world, into the academic world, to be respected as the great American art form that they are. And in a way, when I say my twin career, if you love comics, you become a comic book historian, whether you like it or not. It's sort of like the way great guitar players like Keith Richards, they know the history of every lick they're playing from the black bluesmen that they got it from. Steven Spielberg knows the history of movies. So does Martin Scorsese. Bob Dylan knows the history of American music. So if you're an artist in love with the art that you're making, I don't know how you don't learn about the history of it. And because you're one in a long line of that art form. So I became an armchair pop culture historian. You know, that plus $3.50 gets me a latte at Starbucks, by the way. Anyway, but yeah, so in addition to comic book history, I also love the Twilight Zone since I was a kid. I think my first visual image as a child was seeing that black and white eyeball in outer space. I must have been 4.5 years old. And I ended up doing a coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone that when you take off the dust jacket, I had him embossed in white, that eyeball. So if somebody had told me, when I was 4.5 years old, hey, Arlen, that image that is affecting your brain, you're going to turn into a coffee table. By the way, this is still the only coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone. And I did this probably before you were born, Keegan. 1990, before the internet, before the Sci-Fi Channel, before anybody was talking about the Twilight Zone nostalgically. And this is still the only coffee table art book about the show. I try to treat the dialogue and narration like spoken word poetry, and the images like black and white art photography. So it's almost like an adult picture book is what I've called it. Because how do you do the Twilight Zone in coffee table art book form? I came out of Rhode Island School of Design. I learned graphic design. And graphic design is words and images. And that's what comics are. Comics are words and pictures. Narrative television is words, the script, the dialogue, and images. Movies are words, and so words and pictures are what our society is. It's in your background and it's in my background, right?
Yeah.
So in addition to being a comic book style illustrator, I became pop culture historian, lecturing, and then in the post-pandemic world, doing webinars, which are basically lectures on the computer with images and words. So linked to my website is like my YouTube channel, my Vimeo channel that have videos of over 100. A lot of them are comic book history, but plenty of television, animation history. I've done webinars on the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, the Batman animated series, the Batman TV show, the history of the Flintstones, pop art, Roy Lichtenstein, Andy Warhol's Superman works. And anyway, so that Twilight Zone book I did in 1990 before listen, I know great artists are ahead of their time, and it's nice to be ahead of your time, but it's also nice to be rewarded in your time, you know, because I think my book came out, like I said, before anything. But that's the way it is sometimes. So here we are, literally 34 years later, and essays that I've been working on ever since my first book came out about my favorite episodes, I ended up getting published, and it's about to come out, The 5 Themes of the Twilight Zone. This is the soft cover version, but it's basically, you know, every episode that I love. Now, there are 156 episodes. I'm very critical about the things I love, whether it's comic book art. I'm an historian of Bruce Springsteen's music. I'm very critical about his output. But as an art historian or critic, of course, we can criticize the things that we love, and we also praise the things that we love to the heavens. At least that's what I do. So when it comes to the Twilight Zone, I'm very harsh. I think half of the episodes were dogs. Now, that might be a little harsh, but I give the Twilight Zone a lot of credit. Back in the day, doing weekly television, a drama without, remember, this was an anthology show without any continuing characters. And therefore, you don't have the same sets. Every week, you got to come up with a whole new world, basically. Well, that's difficult. So I give the Twilight Zone credit. I compare it to baseball averages in my book. You know, I ended up writing about 68 episodes out of 156. That's like batting, I think, exactly .435, which is a pretty good batting average, right?
Yeah, pretty good.
Rod Serling wrote the greatest episodes, and he also wrote the worst. But again, he wrote 92 of the 156 episodes. I think out of that 92, 41 episodes are in my book. 41 of the 68. So 41 out of 92 is, again, like a .460 batting average. So that's not bad. And in doing so, I'm really challenging Twilight Zone fans world over who are going to say, where is my episode? Because again, there's more than half the episodes are not in my book. So my answer to all of them in advance is write your own essays. If you think an episode that I did not think was worthy of writing about is worthy of writing about, then go write it. But that's what art historians do in all fields. Not everything is great. You know, in our internet culture, Keegan, because there are Facebook groups for every piece of crap you can think of in pop culture, everybody loves something, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean everything is equally great, because art historians, critics of all genres, spend time every year. They make lists, they take polls, right? Top 10 this, top 100 this. And that's how it's been done for hundreds of years, whether you like it or not. And this is both a blessing and a curse on the art world, that to be accepted, you've got the critics have to like you. That's a whole nother subject. But in general, what I'm saying is I've made the case in my book that the episodes I write about are the greatest Twilight Zone episodes. And if you got a problem with that, you write your own book and basically say, well, this is where Arlen Schumer was wrong. How could he have not seen in such and such an episode how great it was? You know, Keegan, I have a Twilight Zone buddy. You know, in every field of my fandom, whether it's Bruce Springsteen comics, Twilight Zone, I've got a set of acquaintances. They're not really friends per se, but they're fellow fans. So we're like, you know, there's a brotherhood, right? So there's one Twilight Zone buddy, shout out. His name is Rich Reese. I hope he's listening in. He's an academic. He teaches English in some university, I think in Ohio. He loves an episode called King 9 Shall Not Return. And if you're a Twilight Zone aficionado, it's season 2, episode 1. The very first time Serling was on camera doing one of his classic intros. Okay. That episode is not in my book. short answer is I think it's Serling rewriting episode 1 from the first season, which again, I'm getting into deep Twilight Zone trivia here, Keegan. But my point is, I think the episode is a POS. Do I have to spell it out? And by the way, even in the worst episodes, there might be a great performance, a kernel of an idea, something that redeems the episode even. One of the episodes I write about in my book is one of those bad episodes, but I found something redeeming in it. And that is sort of the exception that proves the rule. But this buddy of mine, Rich Reese, he thinks King 9 is the greatest Twilight Zone episode of them all. He's given lectures on it. And my attitude is, more power to you, Rich. You'll never make me like it. You'll never convince me. But I love the fact that you love it. That's what fandom, right, is all about. And I love when fans back up, instead of just saying, I love that, why do you love it? You know, I run 3 comics history groups on Facebook.
Okay.
One for the Silver Age, the era that I did my book about, and then one on Neil Adams and one on Jack Kirby, maybe the 2 greatest comic book artists of the 20th century. So many people, if you're on social media, all they ever post, if they're not pressing the like button, which, by the way, I hate the like button, I actually take the 5 seconds to write why I like something. But pressing that like button, I want to let everybody know watching this podcast, pressing the like button tells the person who created the thing you're liking, tells us nothing. Telling us that you like something without telling us why you like it or what you like about it tells us, the creators of the thing you like, tells us nothing. I'm making my point.
Hey, I totally understand. I feel the same way. People will like, I like this episode. I'm like, well, what did you like about it so I can do more of that?
I'm not asking you to write a term paper.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like I said, I never press the like button. If I see something I like, I literally take 5, 10, 15, 30 seconds. I write at least a sentence saying, hey, I like the blah, 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 blah. Or maybe I move to actually write something, which is what I thought social media was all about. Like a great Parisian cafe that goes off to, a vanishing point, where you could drop in on any conversation and add your 2 cents. But to just stop by and say, I like that. The people sitting at the table would go, well, okay, what do you like about it? Oh, I like the color. I like the this. I like the that. That gives us something to discuss. Yeah. The whole point of social media aren't these discussion forums. If I told you how exasperated I am, Keegan, as an admin moderator, that I got to pull teeth like a goddamn dentist to get people to say something more than I love that. I like, or the other big one is I had that, or I have that. And that's it. Oh, I had that. What's that famous soundbite from Christopher Bale? Goody for you. Not if you listen to Howard Stern. He plays that clip when he made fun of, they were shooting on set and a lighting guy walked into the camera view and Christian Bale lost it.
Oh, for Terminator? Yeah.
Paraded the lighting guy in front of, and they got it on tape. And one of the sound bites is, oh, goody for you.
Yeah, where he's walking around, he's like, do I just stroll through your lighting like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, whatever. The guy must have said something in his defense. And Bale goes, and this is the Howard Stern plays, this little loop. Oh, goody for you. Yeah. I'm glad you like it. Okay, enough about that. So I write about, you know what? I went with my gut. If an episode moved me to write about it, I wrote about it. But there are plenty of episodes, if I don't think they're good episodes, I have nothing to say about them. They're dismissible. Now, there are episodes I don't like that people love and vice versa. There's an episode 22, which is the famous Room for One More. You know that episode?
Not by name, no.
Takes place in the hospital morgue.
Is that a?
The woman goes up to the hospital room, number 22, and the door bursts open, and that eerie-looking nurse says, "Room for one more, honey." Never heard of that?
Not that one.
Guess what, Keegan? You got to do some Twilight Zone homework.
I do.
There's
Yeah.
some episodes. These are like classic television episodes that nothing. Listen, they've tried to remake the Twilight Zone multiple times. They all suck. Going back to the 1983 Spielberg movie, I love Spielberg, but that movie, piece of shit. All of the Twilight Zone television remakes, all suck. By the way, they all shoot them in color. The Twilight Zone is supposed to be black and white, the middle ground between light and shadow. The whole concept of the Twilight Zone is a black and white concept. And the fact that black and white is still used in artistic photography, in groovy music videos, commercials, shows you that people still love black and white. But, you know, most of the powers that be in Hollywood think young people won't like black and white. So all the remakes, starting with the Spielberg movie, were all shot in color. And to me, right away, you've lost me. But then, of course, the execution sucks as well. And then the only Twilight Zone homage, did you see the most recent one with Jordan Peele as the host and showrunner? That was on CBS All Access, which is now Paramount Plus.
No, I didn't see that. I saw Black Mirror, which I thought was trying to be.
I'm going to get to Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Only because Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone, which came with a lot of promise, if you saw the movie Get Out.
Get Out and Us. And
you know, that was very Twilight Zone-ish. Well, that's how he got the gig. And then he did another movie called Us, which was about duplicates, which is also right out of a Twilight Zone episode called Mirror Image, which brings us to Black Mirror. Why is Black Mirror, though it has its dud episodes too, it has its middling episodes, but what does it have that all the others don't? And because we don't want to waste time waiting for you to answer, Keegan, I'll have to give you the answer. Black Mirror is the vision of one guy, Charlie Brooker. He's like the showrunner, just like Jordan Peele was. But Jordan Peele, those episodes that he did, 21-hour episodes, they all sucked. And I mean sucked. And he had hardly any, I think he wrote and directed one of the 20. He farmed out everything. But with Brooker, he doesn't write every episode, I don't think, but I get the impression that these episodes, the concepts, come out of one vision. In the same way David Lynch's films, a true auteur of film, a director, creates his vision of the world. That's why you know a David Lynch film. You know, I guess even a Scorsese film, although Scorsese has a lot of variety. He used to be more typecast. Spielberg used to be typecast, but he's done a lot of variety. The great directors obviously can do a lot of things, but it's about the great directors have a sensibility, the auteurship of their films. That's why you can feel a Spielberg film different from maybe a Scorsese film, and that's the thing that none of these remakes. The reason why the Twilight Zone is great because Serling's vision. I call it the 5 themes because I broke down all the other writers wrote some of the other great episodes, but I feel that they all fall under these 5 themes of Serling's because he was the first, what now we call a showrunner, Keegan, is what Serling was. He was the first creative person in charge of a dramatic TV show. Before him, people in charge of TV shows came from, in a sense, the account side, the money side, with the agencies, the advertising agencies, or the network. They didn't come from the writers or the cinematographers or any of the creative people. That was unheard of. They can't be put in charge of a TV show. What do they know about budgets and money and blah, 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 blah? Well, Serling, because he won 3 Emmys in the mid-50s, back when television was shot live in New York City. And all that was called the golden age of television by all these critics. 90-minute, serious dramas about the issues of the day. And Serling, along with guys like Patty Chayefsky, Reginald Rose, they were the new brand of post-war television playwrights, they were called, not even writers. And they were almost like stars at that time. And television was live. And Serling won 3 Emmys in a row. And that gave him the creative clout to go out to Hollywood. He was living here in Westport, Connecticut, and commuting into the city. It gave him the creative clout to go out to Hollywood to do The Twilight Zone and be the first showrunner. And the reason why these episodes stand up, that you can watch them today, especially on these Blu-ray transfers, they look like they were shot yesterday in the East Village in New York City on some experimental stage. The black and white looks, I'm telling you, looks as fresh now as it was shot. These do not look like dated films. That's what's great about them. The writing is excellent. The acting is excellent. It's really like the dramatic version of Seinfeld in a way. I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, but I've seen every Seinfeld episode 1,000 times, and I can still watch them and laugh. I know the joke is coming, but it's great writing, delivered by great actors in a great concept. What more do you want? And that's what these Twilight Zone episodes are. They're great stories, beautifully written, incredibly acted, incredibly shot as little black and white short films is what they are. They're like 2-act plays filmed for television. Some of them are very stagey, which is what gives them a kind of a cool look. It's not location shooting. It's obviously a stage, but that almost adds to the drama of it. And I talk about that in my book. So the 68 episodes, I broke down into 5 themes. And I call it Science and Superstition, Suburban Nightmares, A Question of Identity, Obsolete Man, and the Time Element. Now, if you're a Twilight Zone aficionado, which, Keegan, I'm going to turn you into one before this podcast is over.
That's good. My brother would be happy.
Did I mention there will be a test? There will be.
I hope so. Yeah.
I hope you're taking notes. Yeah. There will be a test. But yeah, so I broke down the 68 episodes that I had something to write about into those 5 themes. And I make a case. I begin the book by calling The Twilight Zone the father of American popular culture. Now, I told you I was a pop culture historian, at least the pop culture I love. You can't love everything. You can't study everything. But the pop culture I love. Why did I bring that up? What was I going to say about that? Sometimes I need a script girl. In movies, what a script girl does? They keep continuity. So it's like when they yell cut and then, they take a break for an hour and they come back, the script girl makes sure, you were standing over there and your tie was, undone and you were over here, because they got to pick up right where they left off and everything has to be exactly the same. I need a personal script girl. Keep track of all the tangents I go on that I can't even remember why I brought them up. I wish we could rewind the tape so I knew what I was talking about. Anyway.
You were talking about it being the father of pop culture, like modern pop culture, yeah.
And this is why I love you. You were my own personal script girl just now. Okay. I begin the book by making that claim in my introduction or my preface, one or the other. And then you read the book, the 68 episodes, and my essays about them. And then when you get to the end, my final sentence in the book, let me get my glasses on. Who helped shape Rod Serling's timeless masterpiece and the father of American popular culture, The Twilight Zone. So my challenge to you, the reader, is I make the claim, Then you read all the essays. And then I get to the end and I restate the claim as if to say, did I prove my claim? And all I can tell you is, you read these essays as a viewer guide to the best of the Twilight Zone, and you watch the episodes. I think you should watch the episodes first, then read the essay, and then watch it again. And then you'll see all the things I point out, the pop culture references, the allusions to this, the echoes in high culture, low culture, everything. Times from the past, times in the future. These episodes are so rich, and yet they were only 25 minutes long. And you know, if I were teaching the Twilight Zone to young directors in film school, you want to learn how to tell a story when you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of budget, you don't have a lot of set design, but you got a good story. It's all about the story. What did Shakespeare say? The play's the thing. These episodes, at least the ones I write about, they are primers in the art of terse, to the point, no bullshit, no extraneous subject matter. They suck you in within the first minute. You are sucked into this story. You don't even know how you got sucked in. But that's why Serling was a master of this half-hour dramatic form, which, by the way, doesn't even exist anymore. After the Twilight Zone, anthology drama pretty much ended. Everything became sitcoms. Everything became dramas were 1 hour. The half-hour anthology drama was perfected by the Twilight Zone. So it's hard to compare them to the rest of television because everything else is continuing characters, not anthology, and everything else is an hour long. These half hours, they're like the equivalent in pop culture of a great hit single. It's not an album. It's a song. But how many of us have on our iPod, boy, does that date me, on our iTunes, or whatever system of music you listen to, how many one-hit wonders do we all love?
Right.
Right?
Quite a bit.
Maybe more than the people who we have multiple albums of.
Yeah.
I bet you I have more one-hit wonders on my iTunes than albums, in a way, you know? That's what these Twilight Zone episodes are. They're the equivalent of television hits. In other words, in 25 minutes, they suck you into a story. They build up dramatic tension. You get to the halfway point. There's a little, mini climax. Cut to a commercial, come back. Act 2. They maintain the suspense, the drama, building up to the classic surprise twist ending that we all love in storytelling. O. Henry did it in literature. But Serling perfected it. Alfred Hitchcock had surprise endings before Serling's in the Twilight Zone. The idea of the twist ending wasn't a Serling invention, but he perfected it. Because these Twilight Zone episodes, once you see them, you will never forget their twist endings. Now, again, I'm not sure how much of the Twilight Zone you know, so I can't really test you. But, do you know the one that takes place in a hospital where the woman's getting plastic surgery?
Oh, yeah.
So you know the pig faces at the end.
Yeah, that's there's a couple frames that always stick with me. The other one's the guy on the plane, even though it looks silly. But I always think of those two.
Specifically, for me, it was called Eye of the Beholder, the pig faces. Once you see them, at whatever age you are, I don't know what age you were if you remember the first time you saw that episode, but I can't not believe that those pig faces don't burn into your brain forever. And how many things like that can you say in your whole life that did that?
Right, not many.
And the reason why, when you look at the pig faces,
I have an idea.
Why? What's your idea?
So my idea is they kind of remind me of the old clown masks that you'd see in Heath Ledger's Joker or The Killing, where they're kind of creepy but funny at the same time.
Thank
And
you.
so it meshes some stuff.
Kelly. I mean, Keegan, that's exactly what I was going to say. When you look at these pig faces, your first reaction, I've always believed this, is almost a funny reaction because they look ridiculous. The big pig snouts, the horribly curled upper lip that looks like Botox, on steroids. But yet, at the same time, they also are grotesque. They're repellent. They're horrible looking. How many things ride the line, that ever so thin line between comedy and horror? Most of today's special effects in movies, ever since I'd say Alien, it's all the drippy, gooey, bloody. I feel like we've seen that ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm.
Twilight Zone never had big budget special effects like that. Most of its horror was psychological. But when it showed something like those pig faces, in my book, I think I should have it right here in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, when you look at them, they're both horrible and kind of funny looking.
Yeah.
And riding that line. Look, even one of them is shedding a tear. You see the one shedding a tear on the lower, this one?
Yeah.
You see, they felt sorry for the woman because she was so ugly and they couldn't help her. So they're shedding a tear at the end. So think about it. You've got this grotesquerie that's also funny, shedding a tear, which is both, cliche and kitschy, all happening at the same time. That's, to me, the magic of the Twilight Zone encapsulated, is that it's a metaphor for the episodes themselves, that there's never been anything like them before and nothing like them since. If the aliens came down right now and said, Arlen, we have room on our spaceship for one Earth show about television, and one Earth television show, what are you going to give those aliens? Are you going to give them The Sopranos?
No.
Are you going to give them Seinfeld? Are you going to give them Breaking Bad? These are the shows that outrank the Twilight Zone as greatest show of all time, right? Are you going to give those to the aliens? No, I'm going to give them. Remember I told you half of the episodes I think are dogs. That leaves about 75 episodes. And I ended up writing about 68. I'd say, 40 or so of them are what I would call good to great television, which covers a lot of ground. And Twilight Zone, just a good episode, is better than most television ever done. So it's a very high bar. But then you're left with about 25 half hours. Those are what I'm giving to the aliens. Those 25 half hours are, to me, the greatest television shows that have ever been made. One of them is Eye of the Beholder, of course. And then the other 24 are a different 24 than your 24 or the other guy's 24. And this is, again, my book is staking a claim to finally creating a consensus about the Twilight Zone. Not every episode is great just because you love it. Right? Not every Picasso painting is ranked as great. They're not all evenly ranked, right? And in art, I'm a Bruce Springsteen fan. There are albums I don't like. There are songs I don't like. And I give you the reasons why as best as I can analyze, even though, again, music is an emotional, sensory reaction. But just as there are music critics and music historians, that's what they discuss. Is this song as, quote, great as this song? No. And that's what art critics and historians spend a lot of time doing, is creating consensuses within that art form. So that's what I'm trying to do with the Twilight Zone. And, one of the blurbs on the back of my book is from an author of a Twilight Zone book called Everything I Need to Know I learned in the Twilight Zone.
Oh, Mark Dovizak.
Mark Dovizak, yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
And, he's great, right? So he wrote. I asked him to write a blurb for my book, and listen to this blurb. Among the top echelon of Twilight Zone scholars and researchers, no one has plumbed the philosophical depths, intellectual substance, visual significance, and cultural impact of Rod Serling's landmark series with more insight, perception, and acumen than Arlen Schumer. In the 5 themes of the Twilight Zone, a collection of essays that are every bit as engaging as they are enlightening, Schumer makes the case for why these are the essential episodes from the 5th dimension beyond that which is known to man. Well, did I thank Mark for that blurb? I'm like, are you kidding me? I literally couldn't have said it better myself, so I was very proud and happy that he wrote that. But it's I'd like to think it, he hit the nail on the head that I'm making this claim, and if you disagree with it, it's funny. His book, Everything I Need to Know, which patterned after that book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. That was a big mainstream hit like 20 years ago or something, maybe longer. Remember that book? That was a big hit. So he takes episodes. Have you read his book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in the Twilight?
Yeah, and then I read his Raven one about what's his face? Who wrote the because I know he has Twain ones. I haven't read his Twain ones though.
Well, I'm just saying, in this book, Everything I Need to Know, he basically comes up with 50 life lessons, and then he talks about the Twilight Zone episodes that kind of teach you that lesson about life. And what's funny is he writes about a lot of the episodes that I think are dogs. But remember I told you, even the dog episodes have or could have, and obviously do have, kernels of truth, of significance, something, interesting, worth talking about, a performance, whatever. And by grouping them under this rubric of life lessons, he justifies those episodes. In a way, his book is sort of the answer to my book. My book's biggest criticism from Twilight Zone fans is going to be, I can't believe Arlen Schumer didn't write about my favorite episode. I guarantee you the people that, that's what they're going to lead with. Where's my favorite episode? I think your favorite episode sucks, right? I can see a panel discussion at the next, science fiction convention where it's like a roast, where all the people with the episodes that aren't in my book all come to roast me. And I, of course, would love it because I would tell them why their episode sucks. Anyway, but yeah, it's funny. Like I said, even in the episodes I don't like or think are dogs, he found something worthwhile in them. And that is true, that even in some of the worst, quote, worst episodes, because of the nature of the show, and Serling always wanted to have every episode have substance. They weren't frivolous stories about, I don't know. Everything should have a point, even in a comedy. But in drama, why are you dramatizing if you're not either telling us something about the human condition, saying something about yourself? It could be very personal. It doesn't matter, but don't waste our time with something inconsequential, right? Don't we demand that of all of our storytellers?
We try to, right?
Well, sometimes they come out of a movie going, well, that was 2 hours of my life I'll never get back.
Yeah, no, we're about to dive into The Crow, so I don't have a lot of hope for that new one.
Why? Anyway, boy, that was a long answer to, I think, your initial question.
Hey, it was good. I enjoyed it. I think we touched upon a bunch of different things. I think one thing we haven't is the music, because the music's pretty iconic. I mean, people can hum it, but it didn't come around till season 2.
You're talking about the theme.
Yeah, the theme.
So the theme of season 1 was by the great Bernard Herrmann, who did all of Hitchcock's soundtracks. His first soundtrack was Citizen Kane. Now think about that. Remember I told you before, Serling was the first creative guy in charge of a television show. When he got to Hollywood in 1958 to do The Twilight Zone, Herrmann was already a star writing Hitchcock's movies. Why would Herrmann compose the music for a television show? Because he knew it was Rod Serling. He knew it would be quality. Of course, he wasn't paid anything next to what he gets for a movie, but not only did he compose the theme for the first season and the end credit theme as well, but he continued to compose individual episode scores throughout the Twilight Zone's run. You know the famous episode with Talkie Tina, Living Doll? I'm Talkie Tina, I'm going to kill you. The soundtrack was an original score by Bernard Herrmann. And that was the Twilight Zone's last season, 5 years later. So he always was like the great Bernard Herrmann, right? But here's the thing. After season 1 ended, going into season 2, Twilight Zone's budgets were cut severely by CBS, which is a whole other story. In the same way Star Trek was treated by NBC, it was canceled after season 2. If it wasn't for a letter writing campaign, there would have been no season 3. Twilight Zone was a critic's darling. Serling won Emmys for the writing. It was always had low ratings. It was never super popular. And it was canceled after the 3rd season. They tried bringing it back for one hour season. And those 1 hours, 18 of them, I think 15 of them are unwatchable. I write about 3 of them in my book. That's it. So something about that hour form, again, did not work. And then it had one last season after that, back to a half hour. And then CBS finally killed it. It ended up finding its audience, just like Star Trek did in reruns. But the Twilight Zone concept became instantly popular. It just didn't translate into ratings. Why? Look at the television schedules in the early 60s. Every 3rd show was a Western. Every other show was about a ditzy housewife like Lucille Ball or a domesticated Dinah, what's her name? Donna Reed, you know, housewives, the nuclear family. Twilight Zone was so ahead of its time. Of course it didn't find an audience. They were narcotized by, when I say every other show is a Western, I'm really not being hyperbolic.
You might be underselling it a bit.
I mean, have you ever looked at the television schedule of those early years, of the early 60s when Twilight Zone was on TV? Count the Westerns, you will be mortified. And then everything else was dreck. You know, cheap series, cliches. You know, television in the early 60s was a wasteland. You know the famous quote by Newton Minow, FCC chairman. He made that famous quote, television is a vast wasteland. What a lot of people don't realize is that was part of an interview he did. Later on in the interview, he says, you know, there are a few shows worth watching, like The Twilight Zone. So, people, because we're in a golden age of television right now, ever since Sopranos, you've got Mad Men, you've got Breaking Bad, you've got all these incredible, and right now, I mean, you can't even keep up with these shows. That all the great storytelling is happening in television, not in movies. The 20th century, 21st, has been a golden age of television beyond the so-called golden age of the 1950s. But Twilight Zone was this dark star that burned bright. Also perfectly timed with the Kennedy years, which are not the 50s, but they're not what the 60s became after Kennedy was shot. That's when the 60s began. So what were those years that weren't the 50s, but weren't the 60s either? They were the Twilight Zone years. They were the JFK years, the youngest president, all this promise, the hope for the future. We're going to put a man on the moon. And on television, Serling is saying, well, not so fast. What about the problems here on Earth? What about our racism? What about our bigotry? What about our inhumanity to our fellow man? What about all the deep issues of life? And that's parallel. They almost run perfectly together, the Twilight Zone years and the Kennedy years. And Serling was as much of a television icon as JFK was, you know? So I make those parallels when I lecture about the show.
Well, and yeah, just being iconic. We have a, I guess, tunnel walkway, but they painted it with a bunch of famous doors, and the biggest panel is the Twilight door. So,
which, by the way, in my lectures, I talk about how the Twilight Zone was the middle ground between the surrealism that preceded it and modern art and popular culture that followed it. The Twilight Zone doorway is right in between the surrealist doorway painted by the famous surrealist painter Magritte. He did a lot of doorways with clouds and very surreal landscapes. And then the doors, the psychedelic doors that opened up with psychedelic drugs after the Twilight Zone. But the Twilight Zone was that first door in the 60s that opened up the imaginations of the people watching. Stephen King wrote a book of nonfiction essays called Dance Macabre in 1983. It's a survey of the science fiction, fantasy, and horror fields. And he has a chapter devoted to the Twilight Zone. And in that, he says, the Twilight Zone, Serling, lit a spark in our imaginations that affected us for the rest of our lives. It's the spark that ignited the works of the Stephen Kings, the Spielbergs, the David Lynches, the J.J. Abrams, the Jim Camerons, the creators of our modern American pop culture are all Serling's metaphorical children. And that is why I call it the father of American popular culture. Because, Keegan, I could connect any modern science fiction, fantasy, or horror product to the Twilight Zone in less than 6 degrees of Serling. And I'm making a little aside joke about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. But it's pretty true. You know, pick almost anything that's out there, and I could trace it back to now. It's not that the Twilight Zone invented science fiction, but it was the first American consumer storytelling that treated science fiction seriously. It wasn't giant monsters from outer space like everything in the 1950s. It adapted stories from the science fiction literature field that in the 50s was looked down upon. Why weren't any of those great stories adapted into films? Because Hollywood thought science fiction literature was not literature. It was junk. Just like art critics in America thought movies were entertainment for the immigrant idiot masses. Rock and roll was considered gutter music, N-word music. All the great art forms of the 20th century started out as abused, belittled, ignored, made fun of. And that's what science fiction was in the 1950s. You know, spaceships from outer space, alien, you know, whatever. But it was all, you know, it was all popcorn stuff. Yeah, one movie got through, amazing, The Incredible Shrinking Man. What a surprise. It was written by Richard Matheson, who ended up writing the second amount of Twilight Zone scripts after Serling. But other than that, people like to talk about War of the Worlds, whatever. Science fiction in American culture in the 50s was a joke. Serling comes along and says, you know what? I grew up reading all that science fiction literature by Ray Bradbury and all the greats, Heinlein and Arthur C. You name them, Theodore Sturgeon, all those, the 20th century pantheon. Serling, who was not a science fiction writer, but he loved science fiction and fantasy and horror, He read H.P. Lovecraft. He read all that stuff. And he read EC Comics because he was from the war. Everybody in the war read comic books. So, you know, Eye of the Beholder. I do a lecture called Comic Books on the Twilight Zone. Eye of the Beholder with the pig faces. You know, there's an EC comic story 7 years earlier from 1953 called The Ugly One.
Oh, really?
And guess what? It's basically the same story. Now, Serling claims he came up with Eye of the Beholder when he was sitting in bed at night looking in the darkness. Guess what, Rod? You know what you were doing? You were having a sense memory of this EC story you had to have read 7 years ago. I have no way of proving that. But when I show you in the lecture, side by side, Eye of the Beholder and Ugly One, enough said. So, but I digress. Rick Earl, where was I? Okay, so Serling comes along with Twilight Zone and treats science fiction seriously. He adapts. You know, out of the 41 Serling episodes, 12 of them are adaptations. Serling was a master adapter. Some of the greatest episodes are not Serling originals. You know, Time Enough at Last, where Burgess Meredith breaks his glasses, the one that everybody knows. Please tell me you know that, Keegan.
I know it.
You don't?
No, I do.
Oh.
My brother would come over and slap me if I didn't.
Okay. You talk about Twilight Zone to anybody, chances are they're going to say, oh, yeah, and the one where the guy breaks his glasses. Okay. That was a Serling adaptation, not a Serling original. Because I believe, had it been a Serling original, he would not have left them alone like that with the broken glasses. He was being faithful to the original writer's ending, which was very cruel. As a storyteller, you can't violate that unspoken rule between the audience and the storyteller, where you build sympathy for a character. And then at the very end, in a cruel stroke that he had not brought upon himself, you then strike him with a deadly blow, almost as if to manipulate the audience and say, ha ha, I know you love this guy, but I just screwed him over. And now you're upset and sad. Ha ha, I won. No, that's manipulative. And that's the original writer. Serling was faithful, but you know how? I don't think Serling would have had that pessimistic worldview. I think he would have ended it where he's got his glasses and he's finally reading his books, alone at last, with time enough at last. And you know the famous crane shot pullback? That's what you do. And that would have been a very valid ending. Would it have been remembered? People remember the cruelty. That's what they're remembering when they remember that episode. The cruelty of that. But again, it's manipulative cruelty. So, but Serling was a master adapter is the larger point I'm trying to make. And some of the greatest episodes, the one I mentioned before with Room for One More, Honey, that's an adaptation, not a Serling original. And I could probably stop and think of the other 10 that are in the book.
Now, is number 12 Looks Just Like You an adaptation, or was that an original?
That's not Serling. That is adapted from a Charles Beaumont, the third writer after Matheson.
Okay.
Died very young. He's an interesting story unto himself, Charles Beaumont. But he wrote a handful of great Twilight Zone episodes. Number 12 Looks Just Like You. It's credited to him on the screen, but he was so ill at the time that the ghostwriter was named John Tomerlin. And it's one of the greatest scripts, that episode, because, you know, it's about a future society where you could turn yourself into a beautiful body.
Yeah, when you get to adulthood, you pick from one or two.
Yeah, that's where number 12, you know, is the popular model. But what's great about it, I mean, there's so many lines of dialogue that speak volumes. Like, you know, when everybody is beautiful, no one will be, because without ugliness, there can be no beauty. I mean, I can recite these things. You know, these men wrote about life and about the dignity of the individual human spirit. And what you need is a cup of instant smile. Did anybody ever tell you that? That's a line from that episode. Instant smile. Where is my instant smile? We were promised instant smile. Right?
Yeah, we say that a lot, right?
Smile. Just add water and stir. But I love that. It's right at the beginning of the episode. You know, Marilyn, you need. Oh, and by the way, they name the female lead of the episode. Her name is Marilyn. Now, when the episode aired in January of '64, Marilyn Monroe had been dead for a year and a half. So for them to name a character who's not thought of as good looking, she's plain looking, and her name is Marilyn, and she is being forced to undergo the transformation. Have you seen that episode?
Mm-mm.
You're killing me, man.
I know. I'm letting you down.
You know, you're fair. I'm giving you demerits. Okay, you got a lot of homework to do, buddy.
I love it.
And
I love watching films.
You're only missing, listen, here's what you're missing. The greatest television series of all time. Whatever your barometer is, I don't know what it is. It could be, you know, Smokey and the Bandit. I don't know what your barometer is. Whatever that is for great dramatic television, you got to experience the Twilight Zone before you can critique. Did you watch Breaking Bad?
Not a lot of it, no.
Not a lot of it? You watched some of it?
I watched a little bit at the beginning, as far as just because we went to Albuquerque, and that was it. I don't watch too much TV.
Okay. Well, I feel sorry for you.
I know.
I feel very sorry for you. What do you do with your time when you're not watching TV?
Research, reading.
Research what?
Travel. So we do a lot of like historical stuff. Like we're heading back out to New Mexico in a week to place a historical marker.
So how did your show overlap with the Twilight Zone? How are we even doing this?
Oh, we do science fiction and stuff. Like Heinlein, I read a lot of his stuff. Puppet Masters is probably one of my favorite books.
Okay.
Yeah.
All I'm telling you is maybe my appearance on your show, and you know, when I actually sit down and read this, listen, Paramount Plus is a streaming service for CBS. The whole show is up there. You get my book as a viewer guide. And like I said, you go through the book, you watch the episode, you read the essay, you watch it again. I'm telling you, Keegan, your mind will be blown multiple times. You have no idea what you're missing. Like I said, you're only missing the greatest television show that's never been duplicated, imitated, copied. They've tried, but they've failed because you can't. There's only one Van Gogh.
Right.
There's only one Bruce Springsteen. There's people that try to sound like him, act like him, but guess what? There's only one. There's only one James Bond, Sean Connery. I don't know who all the others are. They're not James Bond. There's only Sean Connery. If you know anything about Spider-Man, there's only one Spider-Man drawn by his creator, Steve Ditko. Every other Spider-Man, they call him Spider-Man. He looks like Spider-Man, but he ain't Spider-Man. To me, there's only 39 issues of Spider-Man and 2 annuals. That's it.
Now we're starting from Amazing Fantasy.
World's most popular superhero, right?
Yeah.
He's been published nonstop since 1963. But I think, and there are people that agree with me, that only the issues that Steve Ditko drew and wrote are Spider-Man. Now, Batman is different. Batman's been handled differently by different creators. He's more malleable. And some people would say Spider-Man is, but not in my opinion. Certain characters in comics are owned by their original artists. Other characters aren't. Superman has had many variations over the years. I think the best version were those Max Fleischer Superman cartoons from the 1940s. Now, if I had to put all my life savings that you've never seen any of them, would I be correct? Or would I lose all my life savings?
No, you'd be safe there. So I've seen the Superman.
I do a webinar on my YouTube channel about the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. And if you've never seen them, prepare to have your head explode. You've never seen anything like these cartoons. You might think you've seen the greatest cartoons, Walt Disney, Bambi, Fantasia, whatever is considered the great Disney animation. Yeah, and then there's these Max Fleischer Superman cartoons that are going to blow your mind. But watch my webinar. That'll give you a taste.
Yeah, I'll definitely do it. We do talk comics.
You're my prime audience. You're a younger generation that has not been exposed to what I call the greatest hits of the 20th century. Even though we're in the 21st century, everything that's been made so far is I don't know how to say it.
It's a duplication.
The stuff from the second half of the 20th century, the post-war American pop culture, we're still feeding off of. All the Marvel superheroes were created in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
All the redos, they just made Beetlejuice again, and they're remaking things. Everything that was made in the 60s especially, we're still feeding off of. And you just don't realize it. It's like, that is the mother lode. It's like if you're a Spider-Man fan and you've never read the Steve Ditko issues of Spider-Man, I'm trying to think of the equivalent. It would be like loving a cover band of the Rolling Stones, but never listening to the original Rolling Stones. And even though the cover band might do perfect covers, when you hear the originals, you go, holy shit, this is the goods, not these cover versions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see that because I was watching The Untouchables one time, and there's a scene with the baby stroller, and luckily I had to watch Battleship Potemkin before then, and I was like, I know where they got that from.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's what the history of everything's about is, I listen to a great radio station in my area called WFUV. They play modern rock music. They don't play pop, but they also play deep album cuts. So they're not an FM rock station, but they're the last remnants of when FM rock was really good before it became very commercial. Individual DJs playing the things they like, but they also play deep album cuts. Now, I consider myself a pretty good music fan, and I know a lot of stuff, but you can't know everything. Well, I'm listening to WFUV one day. This is like 15 years ago, maybe. And I heard a song that I thought was a Rod Stewart original called, am I going to blank on the title? It's not The First Cut is the Deepest, although that's a cover too. The name of the song, it's going to kill me now that I can't think of the song. Oh, I Don't Want to Talk About It, which I thought was a Rod Serling original. And it was one of his kind of syrupy ballads. I don't want to talk about it, how you broke my heart. It's a ballad. I like some of Rod Stewart. Maggie May is a classic song. But all of a sudden, I'm hearing this version of I Don't Want to Talk About It that is killing me emotionally. It's got the emotions of the song like I've never heard them from, no offense, Rod, but your version is like a bouncy pop song compared to this incredibly heavy, deep. Well, it was by Neil Young and Crazy Horse from one of their early albums. Now, I love Neil Young. I may not have that album, but my point is, that's what pop culture history is all about, is keeping alive the originals that you have to keep alive because there'll never be anything like them. I joked about teaching a course called Remedial Media, and you would be a perfect student, where I would basically do lectures and show examples of what I call the greatest hits of 20th century pop culture. Comics, animation, movies, television, all the stuff that is so great that they're still trying to mine and mint and figure out and copy, and they can't. You know, the Flintstones, there was only one Flintstones in the early 60s. You know how many times they've tried to redo the Flintstones?
Yeah, live action too.
You can't,
Yeah.
because there's only the original. It's like the Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason. There were only 39 episodes of the Honeymooners, but you can watch them. Please tell me you know the Honeymooners.
I have no idea. I'm
Jackie,
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Jackie Gleason, Ed Norton, please tell me.
Yeah.
Okay.
You-
But I can't assume you destroyed your credibility with McKeegan. I can't assume you know anything that I'm talking about. But if you know those episodes, why can we still watch them over and over again? Why are they still funny? Whereas other things look dated and old. Why?
Well, I think it just is about hitting a fine line. About, especially with comedy, you're gonna have your serious points, but you got to be funny and hit it at the right time. You can't have too many jokes.
It comes back to the quality of the writing.
Yeah.
Starts with Shakespeare that plays the thing, and then you have the acting. You know, what's his name? Art Carney as Ed Norton, the greatest physical actor until Michael Richards came along with Seinfeld and out-carnied Carney. But they're the two greatest physical comics in the 20th century on television. Art Carney and Michael Richards as, you know, Kramer on Seinfeld. Nobody did the physical humor like Michael Richards did. And you look at Ed Norton, Art Carney, and those 39 episodes, you know, Chef of the Future, and does it core a apple? I mean, you know, we can still quote these things because great art is timeless. Whether it's music, whether it's literature, whether it's art, we can still look at Guernica and feel what Picasso felt after the attack on the city of Guernica. When you look at the painting. And even if you know nothing about the history, the painting will evoke something in you if you've got anything resembling a soul, which 50% of this country, if they vote for he who shall not be named, obviously does not have a soul. And I don't want to segue into that topic, but that's all I'm going to say about that.
Actually, I was thinking about film history, and I was gonna see if you've seen a film called Dinosaur Russ. It's from the 70s. It's like stop motion.
What's it called?
Dinosaur Russ.
No.
But there's a scene, and because we did a deep dive on it, and the T-Rex like looks into the bus, and it does the whole eye in the window, and it flips it over and it bites the tires. And I'm like, I wonder if Spielberg watched this movie, you know, and he got some inspiration.
Send me a link. That sounds
interesting. Yeah, it's free. I'll send you it because it's free on YouTube. So
yeah.
One more movie, because it's pretty popular, I guess, the franchise right now, or they're still making movies of it, is the Planet of the Apes franchise, which has ties back to the Twilight Zone, obviously. But for those that may not know why, and may have just been mad about Tim Burton's version, which was more closer to the original, do you want to explain why it was different?
Okay, so if you go back to the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, 1968, all along you're made to think in the audience that we're on another planet where apes rule over humans, which is the essence of Pierre Boulez's original, I think, 1960 book, that it took place on another planet. But then you get to one of the greatest endings in movie history that ranks along with the discovery of Rosebud at the end of Citizen Kane. Please tell me you've seen that. Please tell me you've seen that.
Oh, of course I've seen Citizen Kane.
Don't say of course. How can I assume you've seen anything?
Hey,
Okay.
If it's a movie, there's a much higher chance that I've seen it.
Thank you. Okay, so the ending of the Statue of Liberty on the beach is one of the greatest endings in movie history. When you look at the credits to the movie Planet of the Apes, it says screenplay by a Michael Wilson and Rod Serling. Now, if you know anything about the making of Planet of the Apes, it started out where Serling was the initial screenwriter. He wrote a couple drafts. It went through, there's a whole backstory. and then Michael Wilson, whoever he is. I don't think he's the same Michael Wilson. Isn't there a Michael Wilson that produces the Bond movies with Barbara Bach? Barbara something? Barbara Broccoli. Isn't the co-producer of Michael Wilson?
Michael Wilson. Let's see if it's the same one.
I don't know if I don't think that's the same Michael Wilson that co-wrote the Planet of the Apes screenplay. I think it's a different Michael Wilson. Suffice it to say, it's one of the great backstories of, movie making is how Planet of the Apes ended up getting made. And it's your typical convoluted backstory. In the end, Serling gets a co-screenwriting credit after Michael Wilson's name. But here's the thing. If you know your Twilight Zone, the ending to Planet of the Apes comes out of a Twilight Zone episode from 1960, the first season, called I Shot an Arrow into the Air. And it's all about a spaceship from Earth with like 8 astronauts crash lands on what they think is a desert planet. 5 of the crew members die in the crash, 3 are left alive, and one of them goes rogue and kills the other 2. Well, before the last one dies, he scrawls in the sand what looks like the letter X or maybe a lowercase t, and then he dies. And we don't know what he was trying to show the guy that killed him. So the guy that killed him, he's left alive. It's like 10 little Indians. And he's climbing over the desert rocks and mountains looking for water. And he gets to the top of a mountain, and what does he see? Telephone poles and signs to Reno, Nevada. They had crash landed back on Earth without realizing it. Now, Serling, though he wrote the teleplay, the story is credited to a woman named Madeline Champion. And you ready for this? When Twilight Zone first aired in the fall of 1959, Serling is at a cocktail party in Hollywood celebrating, and the Gemini space program had just started, or whatever. They were called the Mercury astronauts. If you've seen The Right Stuff, they were announced in 1958, I think, the first astronauts with John Glenn and all that group. And if you saw the movie The Right Stuff, right? So it was in the air. This is a year later, 1959. Everybody was talking about the space race and the Soviets. And so at the cocktail party, this woman says to Serling and company, I bet you that if astronauts crash landed in the Mojave Desert, they would think they were on another planet. Serling so loved that idea, he took out his wallet and paid her $500 on the spot. Now, that's the urban Twilight Zone legend. Whether it actually happened like that, I don't know. That's how I know the story, which sounds plausible.
Right.
So, how does the ending of Planet of the Apes in 68 wind up with the Statue of Liberty? According to some people in the know, they say, oh, that wasn't Serling's idea. It was already, Michael. I don't care. You're going to have to prove to me in a court of law. I'm showing you Exhibit A, which is the Twilight Zone episode, for why the ending of one of the greatest movie endings is courtesy of Rod Serling. Okay? Enough said? And that's one example. I'll give you another example. I mentioned Sean Connery as James Bond. The very first Connery Bond movie, Dr. No. Okay, it features the first Bond villain, Dr. No, who was a Jewish American actor named Joseph Wiseman. They didn't cast an Asian. They made up his eyes to look Oriental, as it was known in those days. And how does he play Dr. No? As written by Ian Fleming, but still, you had to do it, live. It wasn't a book description. So Dr. No is brilliant. He's, of course, evil, but he's also brilliant. And he's got the best of everything. He's super rich. He lives in the underground lair with state-of-the-art everything, right?
Yeah, he's kind of anti-Batman.
Right. But he's a diabolical, evil mastermind. But he could have been a good guy, but he decided to go evil. But he's got the best of everything. He's super smart, and he knows everything about everything. That is the archetype of the Bond villain. Now, I admit some of that comes from Ian Fleming's novel, which I've never read. So I'll give him that. But here's the thing. How is Joseph Wiseman cast as Dr. No? I'm not enough of a Bond expert to know how that happened. But you ready for this? A year before they make Dr. No, Joseph Wiseman is in a Twilight Zone episode called One More Pallbearer. And what's it about? A
secret
rich, brilliant, megalomaniacal, rich man in New York City builds an underground bunker which has the state-of-the-art everything. He's erudite. He walks around in an ascot. He's got the cigarette. He's super smart and super brilliant and super rich, but of course he's evil. Rod Serling wrote that episode. Joseph Wiseman plays that guy. I would bet dollars to donuts.
That's why.
A year later, they're casting Dr. No. Everybody watched The Twilight Zone in those days. Creative people especially. I guarantee you Saltzman and Broccoli knew The Twilight Zone. I bet you they saw Joseph Wiseman being a rich guy in an underground bunker with state-of-the-art everything. Rod Serling does not get the credit for creating the archetype of the Bond villain. You watch One More Pallbearer, which, by the way, it's not in my book because I don't think the episode is worthy writing about. But I could probably write just about that aspect of it. But I just did it to you now. So that's an example of Serling not only creating one of the greatest movie endings of the 1960s, but creating the archetype of the Bond villain, and people don't even realize either.
That's awesome. There's so much that you can...
Did I just blow your mind?
You did, yes.
Watch the episode, One More Pallbearer. It's not a great episode, but listen, some people love it. What can I tell you? But for that reason alone, and then watch Dr. No, and you tell me that's why he was cast. And they basically said, hey, Rod Serling gave us a template. Let's just copy it. And that's what they did.
It's always fun seeing that kind of stuff. You got to go back to like The Shadow with Batman and stuff like that.
Well, again, everything is, there's no new thing under the sun. Everything is what I call the Reese's Peanut Butter School of Creation. Everything that is considered new or original, Keegan, is merely two things that existed prior that were never brought together. And the bringing together, it's like 1 + 1 = 3. You've created something new out of these two things. So Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Peanut butter existed, chocolate existed. But until Mr. Reese put them together to create the world's most popular, I think it is, the world's most popular candy is the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. I don't know if, I think that I heard that.
It's the one I go for.
The point is, everything that when you examine, look at Star Wars. Do you think what was original is the putting together of those pre-existing elements? So what did Lucas want to do? He wanted to do an outer space soap opera that had
kind of like John Carter
movies, with the gun, the gunships and all that stuff. He wanted spaceships like Flash Gordon. He didn't want 2001: A Space Odyssey where everything is silent in outer space. He wanted whooshing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of the elements in Star Wars existed previously. He brought them together and added his own, and that's the Substance X. If you know about the Powerpuff Girls,
yeah.
Professor X added that special elements, whatever it was, Substance X.
Yeah, sugar spice and then Substance X.
X is the person putting together those pre-existing elements. It's that mystery of your own, and this is why not all art is great, because the degree that a person invests of themselves into that creation is the secret sauce that makes those two elements combust correctly into a quote new thing. So Star Wars, if you knew your film history, you knew where, oh, I know where he got that from. And oh, that's from Flash Gordon. Oh, that's from Buck Rogers. And oh, that's from the World War II movies with the guys in the gun turrets. But it was Lucas's vision, Substance X, to bring them together as well as he did. And you get Star Wars. See, so when people go to imitate Star Wars, you're imitating the wrong thing. They imitate the surface creation. That's why Battlestar Galactica and all the pieces of crap followed Star Wars. It's not that people wanted to see science fiction movies. People want to see visions of unique, original creators. And that's what you imitate. You find an original creator with a vision and you give them $200 million. That's copying Star Wars, but Hollywood doesn't somehow get that. So what they copy is the surface of the success, not the core of the success, which is, and this gets back to Twilight Zone, when I said Serling was a creative person in charge of a television show for the first time. Great actors wanted to work for him. Great writers wanted to write for him. And everything about it was, when I interviewed people, when I did my first book, I went out to LA, and the people that were still alive that had worked on Twilight Zone, the running theme of all my interviews was Rod let us be, he let us do our jobs. He let us be creative. It sounds so simple. And yet I've been in the business world. I've been in advertising. People still don't get, if you want the best work out of your creative people, you let them be creative. But instead, creative people have since time immemorial, dealing with people that are above them in power and who basically tell them how to do their art. And you end up with compromised art, which is most of the pop culture. It's compromised. Why was Barbie such a hit? Barbie. Why was Barbie a multi-billion-dollar hit? Do you think it was because the doll is popular?
I mean, I'm sure that helped a little bit.
My point is, if you know anything about that movie, that wasn't a corporate movie about a doll. That wasn't a movie by committee. That didn't come up in a writer's room. It came from an individual sensibility. Greta Gerwig, the director, who played with Barbie dolls as a kid. And she was a creative director, respected and a great writer herself. She had done movies, but she had a vision for this goddamn Barbie doll. Whereas if you gave $100 million budget to 10 other women that played with Barbies as kids and quote, love Barbie, you would maybe get 10 pieces of shit for your $200 million. But Mattel, to its credit, signed off on giving a creative individual artist the money to do their vision of Barbie. And gee, what a surprise. It made $1 billion. And it's not because people want to see Barbie movies, which is why you're going to get now more doll movies. Because Hollywood copies the surface of the success and not the core of why the success happened.
Yeah, no, you also do your lectures. You have one coming up here soon about the Twilight Zone. Do you want to tell the audience so they can...
You get your comp, an email notification of a comp today?
Yes, I did get one today.
I always want to make sure those went out. So yeah, I'm doing a webinar with New York Adventure Club, which is a company I've been working with since the pandemic shutdown. They, pre-pandemic, were doing live walking tours in New York City. Overnight, they had to switch to webinars. And they asked a friend of mine who was a Frank Sinatra expert. They needed people that could not only talk and were knowledgeable, but were also visual. Because a webinar, you can't just talk. You got to show images. So they asked my friend Will Friedwald, do you know of anybody that's visual that knows their stuff? And he goes, you should talk to this guy, Arlen Schumer. So I've been fortunate that ever since 2020, I've been doing webinars on and off with New York Adventure Club. They're ticketed. I think now it's $12, but if you can't make it live, the $12 ticket enables you to watch a recording of the webinar for up to a week. Because the problem with webinars, everybody's on a different schedule. You can't find a time that's right for everybody. Because if you pick a time for the East Coast, the West Coast is too early. And then England can't see it. And then if you pick it too late at night, too early, there's no, nowadays, everybody watches everything at their own time. That's why podcasts are so popular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you download it, you watch it when you want them. You know, how many shows do you tape so that you don't have to watch the commercials? You can watch it later and zip through the commercials. So I hardly watch any broadcast television anymore. And yeah, so anyway, so it's nyadventureclub.com. And it's a webinar honoring the 65th anniversary of the Twilight Zone, which is actually October 2nd. So it's coming up in a couple of weeks. And I do a webinar showing in visual examples how the Twilight Zone was this middle ground between the surrealist art that preceded it, and then everything from movies and television and modern art and popular culture that I believe has been influenced by Twilight Zone, whether they've acknowledged it or not. And I back it up by showing examples. So that's primarily what the webinar is this coming Wednesday night, 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. So my website, there's an events blog subpage that lists all of my comings and goings with all the URL links you'll need to find that.
Well, and also, do you want to let the audience know when your book comes out?
Okay, so not only I want to let you know that the book, I think you can pre-order it now through either Bear Manor Media, the publisher, .com, or I think it's on Amazon. You can find it and pre-order it. But in 2 weeks, I live in Westport, Connecticut, where I mentioned Serling lived in the 50s. So I convinced the library here, which is a state-of-the-art library, to do a 4-day symposium called Westport in the Twilight Zone, where I not only interview authors like Mark de Vigiac, but I also screen Twilight Zone episodes and the movies they either were inspired or ripped off or influenced. But there are 2 movies that were partially shot in Westport. And one of the episodes on Twilight Zone actually takes place in Westport, where Serling lived. And it influenced a great movie. Have you ever seen the movie The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster? 1968.
It is on my to-do list, though.
Cult film.
Yeah.
You're not going to believe this film, but I got the recent Grindhouse Blu-ray DVD release of it. And the copy on the back says, it's like a Twilight Zone feature-length episode by way of The New Yorker. The Swimmer was based on a famous short story by the great John Cheever, one of the 20th century chroniclers of suburbia and its discontents. And The Swimmer was a 1964 short story, also celebrating its 60th anniversary. It's considered his greatest short story. And all I'll tell you to wet your whistle, it's about a guy that decides to swim home via his neighbor's pools that form what he calls a river of pools back to his house. Now, without saying anything more, if that already doesn't sound Twilight Zone-y, I don't know any other way I can describe it. But if that doesn't pique your interest, then I don't know what will. Because I remember seeing this movie on TV as a kid. In the 70s, I was a teenager. And I was a fan of the Twilight Zone from my childhood. And I remember seeing this movie, being blown away by it and going, that's like a Twilight Zone episode. So the movie was partially shot in Westport.
Oh, wow.
And you know the famous actor, Burt Lancaster?
Yeah.
One of the American icons of the 20th century. he considers The Swimmer his greatest film and his greatest performance. So think about it, Keegan. It's like a full-length Twilight Zone episode. It's Burt Lancaster's greatest film. It is so much of a film about what the 60s were about. Now, the 60s were about a lot of things. Political upheaval, the establishment, the generation gap, the baby boomers, the culture, the clashes, everything, right? The Swimmer is one of the defining movies of the 1960s. And all I will say is the ending of The Swimmer, it's on a level with Citizen Kane, Planet of the Apes, I think 2001: A Space Odyssey is and they were all from 1968, by the way. It took 27 years after Citizen Kane to have a monumental ending of a movie, and 3 of them happened in 1968, and The Swimmer is one of them. So at the symposium, opening night, I'm going to screen the episode of Serling's called A Stop at Willoughby, which takes place in Westport. And Serling, remember, lived in Westport. And I show you how The Swimmer Willoughby might have influenced John Cheever to write the story The Swimmer, which then became this incredible cult movie, which now in the 21st century, Grindhouse just put out a Blu-ray DVD package. It's now considered a classic of the 60s and one of the great, and Burt Lancaster was right. And like all the great cult movies, it bombed in its original release. The critics were mixed on it. But like all great art, here we are 60 years later, and I'm going to be screening The Swimmer at this Westport of the Twilight Zone Symposium. And I have a New York City book signing and screening the following week, October 5th, a Saturday right after the October 2nd publication date. So all of the links to these things are all on my website on the event blog in all separate entries with all the URL links you'll need to get to those things. So how's that for a lineup?
Oh, it sounds awesome. And I will definitely make sure to do a review of the book. I'll pick up a copy and read it and share it here.
Mail address. I'm going to send you a copy.
Okay. I'll send it. Yeah, no, I would love to read it and talk about it on the channel.
And if you read it, I'm going to quiz you on it. There will be a test, both oral and written.
Okay. Hey, if I read it, I'll...
Your homework, man. You got to watch at least 68 episodes.
Okay. Well, luckily, see, my brother has the complete series.
On DVD, Blu-ray?
Blu-ray, yeah. He's a big Twilight guy.
So listen. And he's going to love my book, right? He'll buy a hardcover. I'll send you a soft cover, but he'll buy a hardcover. Right. And listen, I'm only in this business as a book designer for the hardcover. The soft cover is what I call a necessary evil to get the hardcover. But a real book is a hardcover. It just makes the whole thing feel a little more stately. And I'm aiming my book to be the definitive. If you want to know why The Twilight Zone was great,
read it.
Read this book. And there's a bunch of other books. By the way, my book is not an episode guide with every detail of the production crew. There are books out there about The Twilight Zone that have every dollar spent. If you want to know that kind of trivia, guess what? That's not what this book's about. It's not about trivia, but I'll bring up points that will make you go, wow, I didn't realize that. Even the diehard, your friend. See, it's interesting. You're a perfect test case. You and your friend, it's your friend, right?
My brother.
Your brother.
Yeah.
Okay, you're the perfect test case because he knows the Twilight Zone and loves it. And you don't know the Twilight Zone, but you're a prime candidate to love it. His reaction to my essays is going to be different from yours because he knows the episodes. But guess what? If I've done my job well, even the most diehard aficionado is going to read these essays, and I will bet they may not admit it, but if they're real, honest, they'll say, I thought I knew this episode, but when I read Arlen's essay, he shined me on to aspects of the episode, even if it's only one thing, that I will bet dollars to donuts that will be new to them if I've done my job well, and I think I have. I'm very proud of my essays. I've been a visual artist most of my whole life. I've had enough published writings where I could call myself a writer, but this book is really about my writing more than I still design the book. It's still, I give the Twilight Zone that black and white TV aesthetic,
Yeah.
But it's really about my writing, which I'm very proud of. So for the newcomer, it'll be great because the essays will be new to them and the shows will be new. But I challenge every diehard fan, and they are legion, to read these essays about the episodes you think you know. And I promise you, I will bet them. Now listen, only if they're honest, because they can say, Arlen, I love this episode. I read your essay. It didn't tell me anything new. Well, I don't buy that. I'd have to quiz them. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for you, it'll be different than for your brother. But I'm really interested in the feedback from both of you, because it'll be completely different feedback. But I'm going to bet you right now that when your brother reads the essays, when you're together and maybe you're watching, because that would be great if you could watch these episodes together and kind of read the essays together and discuss it. Mm-hmm. But mark my words, as my mother, may she rest in peace, used to say, mark my words, you'll remember this conversation, Keegan, and you'll go, Arlen was right. Your brother will be saying things like, wow, I thought I knew this episode, but reading what Arlen wrote, holy crap, I never even thought of it that way. And that'll be a victory. That'll be like, yeah, that's what I hope.
Right. Yeah, no, and I'll make sure to tell my buddy Alex about it so he can get a hardcover. Yeah.
I need people to buy my book. I could use the shekels.
Yeah, no, I will make sure to promote it where I can.
I sent you all the links. You should have all the links for everything you need. All right?
Yep.
Promise me we should have a follow-up podcast where after you watched everything, seen everything, read everything, then we can come back and have an in-depth conversation, because you'll be aware of all these things.
Yeah, well, we can do that. And I would love to do one on Bruce Timm's Batman too.
Anytime, Keegan, I'll always, now that we've broken the ice, I'll always be available to you if you want to talk about anything and everything.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll set it up, because this has been fun and very informative, and I can't wait to dig into the book, because it sounds very exciting and it'll inform me. And then when I watch it, I'll get more depth, because I love that kind of stuff.
This would be a great bonding thing with your brother,
Yeah.
To watch these episodes together and then read, the stuff together.
Yeah, we'll take it on the road when we go, and we'll watch it there. And
yeah, are you kidding?
In the Airbnb, yeah, just put it on. And
listen, the nice thing about my essays, they don't go on and on. Each one is like 3 pages.
Okay.
And the type is very bold and easy to read. It's not one of these books where it's 1,000 pages of text and you're like,
oh. And it's like a textbook to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, my book, believe me, is punchy. It's really like the episodes themselves. They don't go on forever. They get to the point, every word counts, believe me. I kerned every letter in this book. If you know what kerning is, the letter spacing between letters, it's called kerning. I learned that at Rhode Island School of Design. I kerned every letter in this book. Hey, this book is my masterpiece, man. You have no idea. I one night I'm talking to a friend, and I was talking about the wisdom that's in the book, because I posit Serling as like an Old Testament Jewish prophet, just like Bob Dylan. They're Old Testament prophets, but in modern disguise. But the lessons they're teaching in their works are timeless. And I'm talking to my friend, and I said, my book is like It's like the Torah of the Twilight Zone. Now, I know you're not a nice Jewish boy like I am, but if you know what the Torah is, it's the first 5 books of the Bible called the 5 books of Moses. The Christians, that's called the Old Testament. And they put that together with the New Testament, and that's what they call the Bible. But to Jews, the Torah is the first 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus, whatever. Anyway, all of that Old Testament wisdom that all the prophets wrote about, that's the Torah. The Jews call the Torah the tree of life. Like, that's all you need. If you can save one thing in a fire, you save the Torah. So this is the Torah of the Twilight Zone, baby. And you have no idea until you read it how much wisdom from the Serling and the other writers that I made a concentrated attempt to get across in this book. And that's what I think most proud of. And I can use it in my promotion because it, again, I'll back it up. I'm calling it the Torah of the Twilight Zone. And that's exactly what it is. There's a lot of wisdom in this book.
No, I love it. I'm excited to dig into it. I love that kind of stuff. My buddy John wrote one about King Kong and just all the history and O'Brien and all that.
Of course.
And that was so fascinating to me. So I'm excited.
When you watch King Kong, it doesn't look dated. The special effects scenes still are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example of great art that, even though it has some period trappings, you can still watch it today and it feels just as fresh.
Yeah, it's still just as exciting.
Well, I envy you. I wish I could be watching these episodes with you, Keegan, and kind of reading the book with you, like just to experience. You know how when you bring somebody to something that you love, like, whether it's a band or something, a movie you love, you want to turn the people you love onto it, right? So you bring them to it. That's how I feel about the Twilight Zone, is that I wish we could physically get together on my beautiful 65-inch screen with the Blu-ray. I hope your brother has a good system.
Yeah. And if not, I have a 4K system at my house.
So again, either buy the DVDs on Blu-ray or stream on Paramount Plus. You'll get my book as a viewer guide, and man, you'll be set.
Awesome.
And then I'm excited. Be a test. Yeah. There will be a test. I got to test you to see if you've actually watched the episodes.
Hey, I'll watch it.
It's a little shot with me, A little.
Hey, if it's movies, I'm better. But for Twilight Zone, I will watch it. I will sit down. I will watch it.
And then all the things I'm saying to you are all going to come back to you like, holy shit, Arlen was right. This is just like Chucky. And, oh, this is just like this other movie. And, oh, wow, this is just like, you'll see. The father of American popular culture, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone.
It's amazing. They need a statue in his hometown or something.
A what?
A statue. Just something there. Yeah.
They just put up one in Binghamton, his adopted hometown. The real statue of Serling should be the size of the Capitol Theater building in LA. It should be in Hollywood where the Twilight Zone was made. Because if he's the father of American popular culture, there should be a statue of Serling as big as a skyscraper.
Yeah.
If life were fair. Not a 6-foot statue in Binghamton. No offense, Binghamton.
But who goes there just to travel?
I once spent a month there one weekend, as they said.
So it was good in Binghamton. No, awesome, though. Thank you for joining us again. I'll make sure to put all the links in the description. So if you guys didn't get that at the beginning, they will be in the description below. And Arlen, we'll definitely have to do this again, especially after I read the book.
Time, man.
Yeah.
I would love to chat with you about anything and everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and you have a wonderful night, and we'll be talking soon.
Absolutely. Take care, man.
So once again, we want to say thank you to Arlen for joining us for this excellent conversation on the Twilight Zone, amongst a couple other topics that we discussed. And please, please, please make sure to go follow those links in the description below to find those awesome books, as well as find out more information on the symposiums and lectures that Arlen does, because I promise you, you will learn a ton of stuff. But until next time, guys, for more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, did you learn anything from this about the Twilight Zone? And have you actually been to one of Arlen's lectures? Tell us in the comments below.